All right, welcome in, folks, to another special episode of I've Got a Theory. And today, I don't believe housing is the solution to solving homelessness. I don't think housing is a solution. That's what everyone says. Housing is a solution to homelessness. And I'm Henish, and I spend a lot of time researching and thinking about stuff and trying to sort through ideas. And some are good, some are bad, but I like to put all the ideas out there. And that's why we've got this show called I've Got a Theory. And in fact, I believe that unplanned pregnancies have a wider reaching consequence than just the babies. I think that that's a significant factor in the homeless. So today I've got on my guest, Rocio Olea, who's talked about women and changing hair color in the past with me, and she also works with me here. But I wanted to have her on as a guest because I sprung this topic on her and I wanted her to talk with me about it. So Rocio, I think that people always talk about the homeless problem and what do we do? It's mental issues and mental addiction, and it's because they don't have a house. And we've discussed this a lot because I live in a part of town where we do have a fair amount of homelessness, and everyone cares about them. We want to solve their problems, but the problem seems to be is that many of them don't want to solve their own problems, right? When you look at the studies and the groups that go out to meet with the homeless, 90% of them plus don't want housing. And that's what homeless advocates always say is we need to build more housing. We need to put them in housing. They've been displaced from housing. But I heard this the other day, and it was actually my brother that said it. It's not just that they're homeless, they're also homeless, right? And you know, it's kind of a joke, but it's also true because and I've heard this from many advocates that I've talked to is that, hey, this isn't just a person that just lost a house or lost a job. They've also burned every bridge they have, right? They've already pissed off their family. They've already pissed off their friends. They've already pissed off anyone that could support them. And it's hard for the people that are in their network to want to give them any more help. They've already gone through those resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you look at unplanned, and I've researched this in the past when I was in grad school, we did a big study on overpopulation and how population control is important. And in a lot of countries, this is kind of surprising, so you might be surprised by this. In a lot of developed countries, the unplanned pregnancy rate is 5% or less. So that means that women are planning to have a baby later, or maybe they didn't want to at all. That only happens 5% of the time, right? For women in that demographic of 15 to 45 is what I'm seeing in the studies, right? It's 5%. But guess what that number is in the United States?
20%?
45%.
Wow.
Almost half of all pregnancies are unplanned, right? Either that means they thought they wanted a baby, but maybe not now. They wanted it later, maybe not with this current partner, right? They do want children, but it just wasn't a good time and fit. The other part was I didn't want it at all, and now I'm pregnant, and now what? So from that statistic, about 42% end up terminating the pregnancy, and 58% end up having the baby, right? And so you could assume what the next steps are for this, or in these studies that I've seen, is that you'll find that there's a distinct correlation between income and socioeconomic status and the percentage likelihood that you're going to have an unplanned pregnancy, right? Makes sense, right? So lower income, lower educated people end up having a higher rate of unplanned pregnancies than more educated, wealthier people that either have access to that information, access to resources to prevent pregnancy, or any other kind of options from that. And so now they're showing that from the studies that the consequences of unwanted pregnancies that don't get terminated are wide reaching, right? They continue to have that it's just an odds thing, right? When you're talking about millions and or billions of people, it's an odds thing. Like if you didn't expect to have a baby and now you have a baby, that makes it difficult for you, right? Because you're not planning your childcare, you're not planning how you're going to take care of them, how you're going to give them the best possible life. And a lot of people do, right? You want to, but it might not be the proper time for you. Because if you're 18 or 17 years old or whatever it is, you're not ready to have a baby or afford it, or you don't have a partner or a family that can help you, that's just going to increase your odds that you're going to have a difficult upbringing. What do you think?
Of course. You need to have a plan of action when you're having another mouth to feed. And at that age, the most likely is not the parents, the the young lady's parents that are going to be helping them, and they didn't count for another little person that they have to take care of, which is like, like it's a economic toll on them, on everybody. So
Right.
now, most of the time they're like, okay, well, you did this. Now you have to figure out with your partner, how are you going to bring them up? And sometimes they get kicked out of their homes. So, yeah, I completely understand. Unplanned pregnancy will take a shift on, the economic status of the family household.
Yeah. So, I mean, so when people say that housing is the solution to homelessness, I don't think that's the case. I think this is a big chunk of it, right? I think the actual original problem is unwanted pregnancies, because if you think about it, like if one of my kids had a mental problem or an addiction problem, me and my wife and our parents and my brother and our entire extended social circle would go out of our ways to do everything we could to help that person, right? And unfortunately, I don't know if a lot of the people that have unplanned pregnancies have that same social support network to help someone that needs help, right? That my kids are less likely to be homeless when they have a problem, right? Versus someone that had an unplanned pregnancy that doesn't have that full network. Maybe the grandparents said, I can't believe you had this baby. You need to get out of our house, right? Type thing, or whatever happens. And now they've lost that network. Now they've got to work 2 or 3 jobs and figure out how they're going to pay their own bills, let alone feed this person and then give them the best chance of a good upbringing. But once that's all said and done, the likelihood of them getting access to the information, education, and resources to reverse their socioeconomic status and prevent this from being a vicious cycle, is less likely when you have an unplanned pregnancy. It's a contentious topic. I've had this conversation with friends before, and I'm not one to yell and fight, but at the same point, I like to try to make a point across to see if there is any conversation with this. And especially when you talk to a homeless advocate, you're like, they know this. They know that they've burned those bridges. They know that they're homeless, right? And that comes a lot from this. And I always wonder, I was like, if I talk to 100 homeless people, how many of them still have access to their parents or know who their parents are, or have a relationship with their own family that could potentially help them through this versus those that don't? And I wonder how many of those would have come from unplanned pregnancies. And I'm not seeing those studies. And it's a contentious thing. I wonder if there are studies and they didn't get published, or what could have happened specifically that made that's making this happen. And I see that, and I think about this because in other countries it's the same thing, right? When we did my study on overpopulation, we did this on India, and we looked at the ways that India was handling their overpopulation, right? And there's a big cultural generational shift that's happened in India, where in prior generations, even in my parents' and grandparents' generations, people would have 7 to 15 kids, right? And in prior generations before them, because healthcare wasn't as good as it's been now, maybe half of them would end up passing away from some random disease or something like that. They just didn't make it through. So maybe you'd have 12 kids, but 6 of them would make it to adulthood, right? And then you need those people to help with your family business or your farming or whatever land you had to take care of. And now in my generation, I see this with my cousins and stuff like that are still in India. They only have 2 kids, right? And they plan to do that because they don't have a farm. They're going to go get jobs. They're going to a university. They're getting an education to get a job as an engineer or a computer programmer or a doctor or accountant or whatever they're going to be. We don't need as much farmhands. But in the poorer areas of India, people are still having 10, 15 kids, right? When you look at countries like, some of the more less developed countries in Africa, the average mom still has 8 or 9 kids there because they still have land to take care of. But you see the shift away from large families and large amount of offspring as the education increases, as your socioeconomic status increases, because you see this in India. If you grow up to a poor family, the likelihood that you'll remain poor is very, very, very high, right? And it's probably true here in the United States too. If you grew up in a poor family here in the United States, it's likely you'll continue to follow that trend. It's hard to buck that trend. And that'd be the ideal world, right? In the ideal world, anyone could do anything they want, but in the reality, it doesn't seem to be the case. And so my theory stands that I think that if we could reduce the amount of unplanned pregnancy, right? I'm not saying don't have babies, but just have less unplanned pregnancies. And fortunately, there's groups that that's their mission. And unfortunately, it's called Planned Pregnancy, right? What a great organization that helps people plan their pregnancies as opposed to having a surprise. I've got a baby. Now I need to figure out what to do for the next 18 years of this thing's life until they can, try to be self-sufficient. So that's my theory. I think that if we can reduce unplanned pregnancy, we could reduce the amount of homelessness, which is the actual root cause of the problem. It's not lack of housing.
Of course, I mean, I think that that's just a very broad net. Like we need to get a little bit more stats on the homeless that were unplanned children. I think in general, like homelessness in itself, it's not, like you said, it's not because of lack of housing. It's just the majority do not want help. That there's help provided. For example, there's a homeless shelter that was just built in Wilmington. And people are not utilizing it, to transition out. They are used to living in the streets. They do not want rules. And so I think that in general is also a problem. It's just the fact that people are used to it, and people that are forced into homelessness because of economic factors, they are going to use the tools that are provided to them to transition out and go back into, a home. So with your theory, that's something new to look into, because it was not on my radar, okay, like all these unplanned pregnancies lead to X, Y, Z in the homeless population. It's something good to look into and see okay, well, if we reduce this, I know at this age, young ladies they're taking care of themselves a little bit more than they were 10 to 15 years ago, where a lot of high school girls were getting pregnant and whatnot. And now people are a little bit more responsible because it is an open topic of conversation. Back then it was so taboo, I'm not going to talk to my daughter about having kids. And now it's okay, let me prepare them because they're going to do it anyways.
Yep.
But either way, yeah, it's something interesting to look into.
So your anecdote is exactly right. I did find stats that over the last several years, the percentage across all categories of people that are having unplanned pregnancies has decreased, especially in the lower income and younger adolescent population. That has decreased significantly. But so you're exactly right. As Americans, we were in a much more prude environment than a lot of Europeans or other, advanced countries, and where they might have been talking about this more often. But now we are getting more comfortable talking about it, and you have to educate your kids because kids can have kids now at 12, 13, 14 years old. And if you don't tell your kids to be smart about it, you're going to be a grandparent sooner than you expect.
Absolutely. And given with the current shift in the cost of living, you need to tell them this is what it's going to cost you. And if they're unaware, they're blind to the whole situation, they're just you're just throwing them to the wolves.
Yeah. I remember hearing those anecdotal stories about kids that wanted to have babies when they were teenagers because they thought babies were cute. And it's the cute wears off when you're changing 3 to 4 poopy diapers a day. And not that they're not cute still, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it takes, I just see it in my family and how many people it takes to keep my kids functioning and productive and growing and stuff like that. So it's a contentious topic. I'm glad that I increased your awareness of that. Yeah, and with the homeless, I mean, and it's not because they don't necessarily want help or housing. I think that they've prioritized whatever addiction they may have, and that's become their master more so than the goals of having a super productive, effective, happy, fulfilling life. It's more, where do I get my next hit? Where do I get my next dose of whatever I need? Because that's what's more important in my mind, and that's what's been solidified in my mind as what I need to stay alive. More so than a house, more so than a job, more so than the proper food or satisfaction of life, right? They're just so hooked on that next high. I only know this anecdotally from watching movies and TV shows, and then also seeing it. We drove through East Village this past weekend, going to some different businesses around there, and there's entire streets of homeless people, midday, strung out, passed out. It's they're not sober, right? And that's a big chunk of it. And it's unfortunate because if they had their mom or dad or brothers or family that was around, someone would probably give them a kick in the butt and say, hey, I'm forcing you to get better because I care about you.
Correct. I mean, I just think addiction is a it's a hard thing to overcome. But in order to solve the homeless crisis, they need to get to the root cause, and housing is not the root cause.
Yeah, it's not because there's not enough housing. Because yeah, you could go an hour east and find a place to live for $100, $200 a month, right? You can rent a bedroom in a
Mhm.
place, and that's pretty affordable to do, right? Even minimum wage makes you $500-$600 a week.
Correct. Yeah, but when you have an addiction, you do not want to go to work.
No.
Everything else is not your priority. Like you said, it's just them trying to get the next high and go about their day. And so like anything in life is just trying to get to the root cause and solving that problem to minimize the homeless population around.
Yep. Well, so that's my theory. Thank you for joining me on the show. And if you liked the content, please subscribe or follow us. You can find us on Instagram at PSTV today. PSTV today is what you can find us on. And otherwise, our shows. I've got a theory, and I believe that unplanned pregnancies got wider reaching consequences than we think about, especially with the homeless. So, Rocio, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.